Okay, so by way of introduction, I am Brad Mitchler. I'm the Vice President of Product here at DD Tech. And today I'm going to be walking us through the new features related to materials planning in our Intuiflow software. So it was great because at the end of that conversation, John and Eric sort of segued into some product discussion around location awareness, which we'll talk about, and S&OP, which is a big topic for our development this year in 2022. And so we're going to kind of walk through in this presentation what's available right now today in Intuiflow materials planning. Tomorrow, we have another session where we're going to be going over the Intuiflow roadmap for the remainder of 2022 and really getting into some exciting stuff around machine learning initiatives that we're exploring as well, and ultimately diving into our product vision for the future. So this session, what we have today, tomorrow's session, where we're headed and what we're going to have tomorrow and in the future. So let's dive right into it. I'm going to assume for this presentation that the folks, our attendees, have some familiarity with both DDMRP and our Intuiflow materials planning, or what was formerly known as Replenishment Plus software. And I think that will serve our attendees well. So Intuiflow 2022.1, which is our current production version, launched in the first quarter of this year, just at the end of January, and it contains a lot of new features and functionalities related to materials planning and S&OP. So I'm going to walk through those sort of one by one and really get into the details of what these new features entail. We've got several things. Location awareness, which John mentioned, is a critical component for a more global rollout like the one that John described. We've added functionality to support phantom parts, a long-awaited feature for multi-source or multiple vendors for purchase parts. Shelf life, obviously critical for those clients and companies that have perishable items and really need to be able to track batches of inventory. Alerts consolidation is a completely improved way to manage and view alerts in the Intuiflow solution. MRP and APM, which is a more realistic approach to S&OP for manufacturing and distribution. Some changes around the Workbench functionality, and then finally, improvements to our auto approval functionality, which is becoming more and more prevalent in our client base. And I think will continue so throughout the market that we serve. Tomorrow, or right after this session, I believe Eric is going to be diving into our scheduling and execution functionality inside the Intuiflow platform. So that'll be a separate session, and that's obviously one of the main tenets of the Intuiflow software. And so Eric's going to go on a deep dive into that software. Please, as I go through these features in the presentation, if you do have questions about these features and how they work or the like, please just submit questions. We'll definitely get to those at the end of the presentation today. So Intuiflow, at a high level, I think three main things have changed at sort of a macro level. First of all, obviously our look has changed a bit, right? We've got this new scheduling and execution functionality. We've got new branding around the solution, which I'll talk about with Intuiflow. And then location awareness is a new schema for location in our software, which allows for much greater granularity in settings, job processing, etc. Let's talk about our new look. So first and foremost, we've got a beautiful new logo, which I'm sure you've seen smattered all over my presentation already, and we'll continue to see that throughout our user conference here. We've changed our dashboard around a bit to allow room for those scheduling and execution changes. Our header bar now includes some more features and functionality. We've completely reorganized our menu, our right side menu, to allow for all the new features and functionality that comes along with both materials planning and scheduling and execution. And then very critically, we've changed the names.
Oh, so sorry to interrupt you, but sure. Are you meaning to share your slides right now? Or?
Oh, thanks, Nicole. I think I was, but maybe it fell off. Let's go back to that. Let's see. There we go. Can you see that, Nicole?
Yes, we can see them now. Right, Thank you.
Brilliant. So we've changed the names for our new Intuiflow modules. Replenishment Plus, which is the core functionality that many of our current users are familiar with, is now Intuiflow Materials Planning. Our S&OP tool, the Advanced Planning module, is now known as Sales and Operations Planning, or S&OP. And our distribution functionality, the Stock Deployment module, is simply called Distribution. For those of you familiar with our DBR Plus software, which was our on-premise scheduling and execution software, now, of course, that's being brought into the Intuiflow cloud version and is known as Scheduling and Execution. And finally, our business intelligence functionality, formerly known as Advanced Analytics module, is named such. So, as we've combined some of these softwares into this one beautiful, comprehensive platform for the demand-driven adaptive enterprise, we've renamed these things to be a little more straightforward and to the point under the Intuiflow branch. Here's a look at the one of the latest builds of our Intuiflow branch. So you're definitely, hopefully, familiar with this screen if you're one of our users. If not, this is our dashboard or homepage when you log into Intuiflow for the first time. We still have the same planning priorities and execution alerts, but now you'll see we also have these tabs for a scheduling and execution quick access menu, so you can hop around the scheduler very easily, as well as a summary of the current status of our work orders that we're planning production for right now. And you can actually filter on different locations to see the status at different locations. In previous versions of Replenishment Plus, we had our About section on the right-hand side, which contained the latest times that we've interfaced to the software and some other useful information about the number of parts and number of records, etc. We've moved that into the About page in the Intuiflow branch, again, to clean up this dialogue and make it a little more easier for our users of all three modules in the software to see everything at a glance. At the top, we've got a new button for the scheduler, and then we've got a really cool new feature. You see this little magnifying glass at the top. That is our search functionality, so users can easily search for specific work orders or items and dive into the details of those straight from our top header. Let's talk quickly about location awareness. And really, this is one of the critical changes if you're upgrading from Replenishment Plus to Intuiflow, or if you're a new user and you have multiple locations in your environment. Previously, in site administration, all of our processing settings, which really relate to DDMRP and how the system manages and processes data, was done at the global level for our clients. Now, this is great if you've got 1 or 5 locations that are in similar regions and have similar requirements. But the reality is, in a case like Rife, what John talked about, where you've got 40, 50 plants, we have some clients now with well over 100 sites using the same instance of Intuiflow. You really need the granular capability to define all of our settings around buffering, MRP, S&OP, scheduling, etc., at the location level. So what you see here is the new look and feel for defining those settings, which allows you to first set a global default for all of your locations, and then set up location augments where you wish for location level settings to differ from the global default that you've set. So very, very cool functionality. Obviously a big part of configuration for each site or plant that you're implementing with Intuiflow. And it's really quite easy to use, and I think really practical. There's also some changes with location awareness in the way that we import and access data, as well as job processing and the historical information that we store related to location. We've really made location a key entity in the software and the database structure to allow for these different processing settings. I spoke very briefly about phantom part functionality. So most people on the call are probably familiar with the term phantom parts. This is a way to structure a bill of material to have a non-inventory item represent a group of items in the bill of material. And previously, we didn't support phantom part functionality in Intuiflow, but now we allow the import of phantom parts into the software with some caveats, right? Parts that are labeled phantom do not have recommended orders in our Workbench. They have no lead time, no inventory. You can't order a phantom part. They are displayed in the bill of material and Workbench views, so you can easily access phantoms and see their groupings. And we still actually will generate supply and demand for phantom parts, mostly for the purpose of netting requirements through the bill of material from above the phantom, through the phantom, and then ultimately below the phantom parts. Here's what that looks like in a rough view of our bill of material view. We've got this great new sort of Pac-Man ghost icon, which represents phantom parts. So users can easily see where those phantoms are. You see this SAA part has 0 lead time. You'll be able to see all the components or parts that are a part of that grouping. Multi-source buy parts, really neat new functionality that is long sought after for many of our clients, where previously you had to define a default vendor for buy parts, and you could only send pending orders back to your ERP system from that one source. Now you have the ability to set up any number of alternate sources for purchase parts. I'll show you just in a moment the screenshot, but you can select an alternate vendor with a new lead time, different order constraints, and ultimately we will calculate the dates accordingly based on those new pieces of data. Very important note on multi-source parts. We're not changing the way that we calculate the buffer. The buffer is still calculated based on one default part source that's defined in our part upload or part interface. And that will still drive the buffer calculation and the initial order recommendation. And then I'll show you here, we just added this great new functionality to be able to split lines as well. So potentially you can control and have lines or purchasing from multiple sources to service the same recommended order in our Workbench via the DDMRP rules. So here's what our new manage order screen looks like. When you go to accept a part in the Workbench, you can click on manage orders there at the very top. And here, when you edit it, you will have the ability to drop down and select different sources, which will update the request date as well as our recommended reorder quantity, just to fit into the new min-max multiple order constraints defined for that specific part in order recommendation. So you can see here, I'm selecting Ranger, which is an alternate source for this part. And I put in a note that we're going to have a longer lead time for this specific buy, which may result in an alert or an expedite later on. Another really neat new tool in our manage order screen is the ability to split lines. So let's say I want to have a purchase. I've got a recommended quantity of almost 800,000 units here for this part, 5106, and I want to go ahead and split it. So I can press split. It will create a new line for me with a 0 recommended order. I can choose the alternate source for that and then define what quantity I want to split off from that original line that I had. So really neat, I think, practical user interface to allow for the management of multiple sources for buy parts in the system. This does require a new interface where you define all of the alternate sources, and it's relatively simple. We'll talk about this tomorrow, but one of the critical aspects of our roadmap now will be to extend this functionality into distribution and ultimately into manufacturing as well, such that we can make or distribute a buy part and kind of go between those 3 order types that we support in Intuiflow. Great. I see there's a question from Joyce here. Does location awareness allow pending orders to be exported by location? The location is still defined in pending orders as it previously was. So depending on how the interface works, you'll be able to, of course, segment based on the exported data just by that location field in the pending orders API, export, or CSV file. Let's see, there's another question. Can the system consider supplier promise dates of parts to calculate stockouts, specifically for parts in allocation and suppliers changing delivery promise dates? Absolutely, Carlos. Typically what happens is we process an order for today plus the lead time, or we have multiple lead times in the system where we calculate the request date, the promise date, and ultimately what we call the order receipt date in our software. That order will go back to the ERP system, and then as that order is approved in the ERP system and changed, the next interface to Intuiflow will bring over any refresh date information where a vendor has had a production slide or needs to change the ship date for themselves, so on and so forth. That new date will get uploaded in our software and ultimately drive an alert, an execution alert, should that cause any issue with the timing of supply and demand in Intuiflow. So absolutely, we're always taking into account the latest and greatest dates that we have in our ERP system, which is the system of record for purchase orders, work orders, and transfer orders as well. Great question. All right, one more question. Will users of Replenishment Plus and DVR Plus need to upgrade to Intuiflow? How long will we have support on our current system? Great question. No, you certainly won't be forced to move to Intuiflow. There's a lot of great new functionality, both with the scheduling and execution functionality and the materials planning side, and I would encourage you to explore upgrading eventually. We have a policy on our cloud versions that we support versions up to 1 year in the past. So versions that we've released right now through last April are supported. And ultimately, users will need to upgrade in order to get the proper support after that time passes. For the on-prem version of DVR Plus, we still are obeying maintenance contracts with that, just as we were before. So good question. But I certainly hope I can convince you to upgrade it. All right, let's move on here to shelf life. Shelf life is a great new feature, something that I think is really going to enable new use cases for clients and other companies to utilize Intuiflow materials planning for. So obviously in many industries, metals, food, medical, pharma, so on and so forth, shelf life is a big part of materials planning. And typically what happens is we have different batches of inventory, which are tied to expiration dates or must ship dates type deal, where we have to be able to obey that and recognize that from a materials planning standpoint, such that if we are going to suffer from expiring inventory, we need to work that into the net flow equation. The way we're doing that in Intuiflow is we're recognizing expiring inventory as a demand order. If that expiring inventory doesn't have the current demand before it in time to support the consumption of that expiring inventory, we'll recognize the net difference between demand and the expiring inventory as a negative in our net flow, which would obviously trigger reordering potentially depending on the position of the net flow in the buffer. So this allows for, it allows time for consumption before inventory expires, but it gives us the ability to track batches and ultimately protect ourselves from an inventory and supply standpoint if we're going to suffer from that expiration. Here you can see our typical all activity view, where we have supply, demand, and inventory sort of sorted by time and date, with a running balance out here, as well as the quantity that's impacting the net flow in red. From a demand standpoint, we've got this new type called expiring inventory, which are these multiple inventory records. The order date here, 3/21 in this case, is the expiration date. You can see the batch ID out here on the right is the source, and ultimately we will see the quantity that's going to impact the net flow right here in our quantity column. Even though this expiring inventory batch is, has units on it, in this case 259 units, right now we're not impacting the net flow at all because there's demand above that expiring inventory, which would consume that expiration. So that's good, and we don't need to worry about that. If we don't have demand between the expiration and today, then we will count that negative demand against the net flow equation. And here's an example of that here, where you see that the whole inventory expiring is netting against the net flow because we don't have demand to consume it. And this is just tracking the batch ID. So really cool functionality. Obviously, some of our clients may have hundreds of expiring inventories or even a single part location, depending on their batch sizing and the cadence of their manufacturing or purchasing. So really important feature to support those clients. If you don't need shelf life capability, your inventory will still work just as it does today. We also display the shelf life quantity in the number of days in terms of the perishability time frame here in the part properties, as well as our zone sizing on the buffer sizing tab. So very, very visible. This is very useful for reporting, a lot of custom report capability using the shelf life expiration time period, where you can predict and analyze inventory that is set to expire before consumption. Moving on to Alerts Consolidation. Alerts, we have retired the old user interface for the Alerts view, and we've moved that into our Workbench, what was previously the Workbench preview and is now the Workbench, which is a much more functional user interface and allows for some really cool sorting and filtering in this user interface. We have changed not the logic of alerts so much, but more the logic of the columns that we display for alerts to enable further prioritization for our planners and buyers. Here's the view of the alerts. You can see I'm in the Workbench page, which many of you are familiar with. Our homepage links will pop right into this, sorted and filtered on alerts, just as it did in the past. But now we have the ability to view all alerts in the same grid, rather than one by one individually clicking and viewing those. Now every single item that has an alert date, which allows us to prioritize based on the criticality and date of an alert, whether it's a current inventory, material synchronization, or a projected stock out alert. So it's quite functional. You can group things, filter just like you can in the normal Workbench. And obviously you can save your own custom views for this as well. So great improvement, I think, for alerts and some of the things that we're able to display here with our quick access and expandable Workbench. All right, MRP and APM. If you're familiar with our old advanced planning module, now S&OP functionality in Intuiflow, in the past we used usually the top level forecast to net through the bill of materials and provide a forecast for the children parts of a bill of material. This enables us to run simulations, supply planning, rough cut capacity planning, inventory planning, so on and so forth, on not just the top level parts, but every part in the bill of material. This is a good method, but it ignores current supply and inventory positions for items within that bill of material. So there's a new option in our daily usage tab in site administration, which allows you to perform APM netting to generate the forecasted demand for child parts rather than the forecast. Essentially what this means is first the S&OP module will create the supply plan for the top level bill of material item, and it will use that generated supply plan as the demand or the forecasted demand at the next level down in the bill of material. And we'll do that all the way through the bill of material, such to create a more accurate reflection for supply planning, capacity planning, so on and so forth. Really neat functionality that I think will be better for most use cases for clients to get those S&OP results. All right, so I spoke about our Workbench preview, which is now our Workbench. Many of you hopefully have been using the new style Workbench for a little over a year now when we first released it, and we have gotten great feedback on it. We've made a lot of changes and functionality improvements to that. We are now making that Workbench the default Workbench when you click on the top button, and we are moving our legacy Workbench to a menu item called Workbench Classic, which we will eventually completely phase out in future versions of Intuiflow. So a good small change there, but ultimately we feel like the newer style Workbench is a much more performant and useful interface for our planners. Lastly, this is a great piece of functionality. More and more, we're seeing our clients utilize auto approval for specific parts and part segments in their environments, which means that they have buffered items that they want to automatically be ordered and approved, sent back to the ERP system without human intervention, because we trust the DDMRP settings. We gain a day of lead time by not having somebody review it, so on and so forth. So of course you can schedule that, and you have been able to schedule that for over a year in our site administration here via the recommended orders auto approve tab. Previously, because of some contention between jobs, we did not allow for material requirements planning to run alongside recommended orders auto approved. Now we've decoupled those two things, so users can use MRP in the system to net demand through the bill of material and orders they approve immediately through the bill of material, while also enabling recommended order auto approval, which is, for most manufacturers that use our system, if they want to take advantage of recommended auto approval, we really needed to decouple these things to enable that. So we have done that, and I encourage you, if you're a client of Intuiflow, to explore the auto approve job and functionality in the system to really make life easy on planners for specific parts or part segments. And that is all of the new features that I wanted to capture for the materials planning branch of Intuiflow. As I said, tomorrow we're going to be going through the future roadmap for both Q2 and beyond, as well as showing some really exciting changes that we're making to our business intelligence platform and our user interface. So just to tease it out a bit, we're changing the user interface to match with our new beautiful brand Intuiflow, and really getting a really fresh look at Intuiflow. So I'll be showing some screenshots from that tomorrow in our roadmap session. We are right up on time here, which is perfect. So I will ask if there's any more questions related to materials planning in Intuiflow. All right, brilliant. And of course, if you do have questions, you can email me after the conference, and we'll be happy to answer those about the new features and functionality.